Hello, folks, and welcome to today's episode of the Hospitable Host podcast. Today, I have with me Dave Krauss, co-founder and CEO at Rent Responsibly. Sorry, stumbled on my words there, Dave. Dave, maybe you can start by giving us a little introduction to Rent Responsibly.
Sure. Thanks for having me. Rent Responsibly is a community building and education platform for the short-term rental industry. It was created by myself and my compatriots. We're all veterans of this space, and we recognize that the biggest gap or the biggest need in our space was actually to get hosts tethered together at the local level. So we focus on community building at the local level. You can think of these as short-term rental alliances, which they've gone from 30 of these to 90 plus in the past couple of years. So there's been a big movement to get organized at the local level. And we focus on education. And the two types of education we focus on are good neighbor education, pretty self-explanatory, and good standing. We believe that to be in good standing, you need to be on the right side of all the rules and regs. And if you're a good neighbor and in good standing, then you're a good apple. So we're in the business of helping folks become and maintain the good apple standards. And we're building a lot of good tools for owners, hosts, and managers across the industry.
Oh, sweet. Awesome. Glad to hear it. And Dave, thanks again actually for joining us. I know that you're recovering from the Austin Marathon, so I know it's taken a lot for you to be here today. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, you got it. Miles and I were chatting about our marathon experiences, and we both limped our way into this call. So we're happy to be here.
Awesome. So I'm going to get straight into grilling you, Dave, because I'm sure that our listeners want to hear more from you. So I'd love to dive into, thinking about short-term rental hosts and proactively contributing to kind of fostering a more positive image for the industry. How can short-term rental hosts do that?
Great question. First of all, I want to say this loud and proud. There is nothing wrong. In fact, there's a lot great about being a short-term rental host and contributing to communities. I think there's been the development of a narrative or some understanding or misunderstanding of who we are, what we do, and the value we contribute. So being a short-term rental owner, host, manager is a noble thing and an awesome thing and a contributing thing to every community. That said, we're not all, like I said, educated about how to be a good apple, right? We hear this good apple, bad apple. Let's get the bad apples out of the industry. So what you can do as a host to contribute to your community and to progress and elevate this industry, I think has a lot to do with community relations and prevention of nuisance issues. So the top three nuisance issues may come as no surprise are noise, trash, and parking. It starts with NTP, and I like to say it's not their problem, right? That's what neighbors say. It's not my problem. So as long as you're managing noise issues, educating your guests about parking and trash, and keeping an eye and good stewardship of your property, those are the basics. It's not complex and it's a little bit intuitive, but we really need to lean into that and make sure that we're elevating our game and ensuring that our neighbors are fans of what we do as well.
Cool, awesome. And then thinking about neighbors, but also the guests themselves. Part of responsible hosting too is kind of the safety of everyone involved, right? So you're inviting people into a home that they've not been in before. There's obviously can sometimes be dangers to that. How can we think about responsible hosting in terms of safety of guests and neighbors and things that hosts can do there?
Well, great question. I think that's one of the next frontiers for our industry is leaning into safety. And first of all, I'll say this. Safety sells, right? If you are communicating in your listing what you've done to be safe and check your property, and perhaps you even gone as far as getting one of the Breezeway certifications and then inspections of your property. Breezeway is a great partner of ours. We've learned a lot about them, and we put them on stage to teach about safety. because there are experts in this industry. So educating yourself about the details of what you should be looking for, that's step one. Step two, I think, is actually putting yourself in the guest's shoes and their experience. So you can be a guest at your own short-term rental, and I'm sure many people use theirs as a guest and staying in your rental. That's half the best part of having one, is using it yourself. But looking around for trip hazards, or the awareness of where a fire extinguisher is, or posting different nuances or things that people need to be careful of, grills and fire pits and things of that nature, making sure you have the education and signage on site, because folks are going to walk into your rental, not know what you know about it. And so it really comes down to communication at that point, and looking through the eyes of a guest as you walk through your property. And then I'll end where I started, get the experts involved, and then let guests know what you're doing to protect them. I think safety is the new professional photos, right? Everybody has professional photos now. What can you do to stand out? Lean into safety.
Awesome. Nice. And I love the mention of Breezeway there. We have actually talked to them about potentially getting them on for a podcast episode around safety too. And so that's a nice plug for listening out for that episode coming soon, folks. And then you also touched on kind of, safety sells. I'd love to kind of go into, thinking about being a responsible host, but then also maximizing rental income and trying to balance the two, right? We want to all look like good hosts and be good hosts for the community. But also at the end of the day, this is a business that we're running, right? So how do we balance the two kind of dynamic issues?
Another opportunity to think about the value you create is inherent. You're an ambassador for your city. You're directing your guests to local businesses. You're giving an authentic experience. You're probably meeting or communicating with your guests and having a cultural exchange. I think that is all valuable inherently. There's nothing wrong with making money and having a profitable enterprise. I did it too. I was a host, and it helped me get the freedom to pursue the lady I now live with and married, and recently welcomed a child with. I credit short-term rentals for that. So it's just important to understand the value we create inherently. That said, how do you maximize and balance that with the profit motive and incentive? I think what the most important thing we can do as hosts, owners, and managers is really communicate properly with our guests through the 4 stages of a reservation. And I'll double click on what that is, because we've kind of studied here at Rent Responsibly what makes for good outcomes vis-a-vis guest experience and guest interaction with neighbors or the community and the place that they're visiting, right? So the 4 steps, step one is pre-booking. They're going to be looking at your advertisement, at your posting, at your listing. How are you communicating what your values are and what you want to give the guest? Are you highlighting the local small businesses? Are you highlighting safety? Are you highlighting the fact that you have a quiet neighborhood and your neighbors deserve the peace of mind as well, and you go out of your way to be a great neighbor, and so forth? Those are the types of ways to attract the right guests, right? Sending that message and signal. And then number 2 is after booking. So after somebody books, how are you communicating to them and asking questions? If you ask the right questions, every host has a spidey sense, right? Your spidey sense, your antenna might go up if somebody's maximizing their occupancy and asking you questions about the nightlife and the bars and so forth. That's all fine, but ensuring they know that your quiet hours are what they are, and again, that you're preventing nuisance issues and instructing them appropriately, is really, really important, especially when you have a group that might present issues if you don't properly educate them. And then last 2 pieces are pre-arrival, another opportunity to remind people of rules and house rules. And we're not trying to be party poopers. I mean, we're in hospitality here, but there's a way to present something like parking instructions in a positive way, in a hospitable way. How do you do that? You tell them what the max parking is and then give them alternatives. If you have more cars than our driveway can handle, here's a parking lot down the street. It costs $2 a night, whatever it is. You're going out of your way to prevent issues. And then the last one, Miles, is the in-stay experience. So assuming your guest didn't read all of the messages, of course, they only usually go to whoever booked the place, making sure that you're communicating on site visually with signage or different methods of communicating house rules. I'm sure Hospitable has great templates for these types of things. You can definitely nip all of those issues in the bud through those 4 steps. And guess what? You will have a longer run at your business. You'll have a more profitable run at your business and a more positive outcome for the community as well.
Awesome. Yeah, and we do have a bunch of templates for kind of messages on our blog as well. So if anyone wants to check that out, that's hospitable.com/blog. Do a search on there for templates, and you should be able to find some on there too. And then I kind of want to jump ahead a little bit here, Dave. I feel like we can't, have a podcast with you on without talking about regulation in the industry, and really, talking about a hot topic of increasing local laws and regulations. Not just in the US, but kind of around the world, focused on short-term rentals. I'd really love to kind of understand how hosts can, actively engage with local regulation. And I guess in the first instance, even be aware of what's happening in their local area and when new regulation is coming into effect.
I knew you'd go there, Miles, and I dive right in. Little anecdote here. I started Rent Responsibly before the regulatory issue came to my town where I was a host in Dallas. And within months, I unknowingly became, the center of the organizing effort in Dallas and created the Dallas Short-Term Rental Alliance. And then we, used a template for building that alliance. And now it's one of the largest and strongest in the country. So the place to start when it comes to regulatory issues, and really before there are regulatory issues, because if they haven't showed up yet, believe me, they will. It is to look for your local alliance if you have one. Rent Responsibly has a directory of all the local alliances that we know of in the country and around the world. And so you can go to rentresponsibly.org and look for the alliance directory there. If you don't see your community with an organized group, message us. We can help you get one started. It does not need to be a full-blown, built-out, incorporated 501c6 trade association. You can start with an informal group, get a couple folks together. We can also help you do that. That's the vanguard. That's the first thing to do. And without that, you're always going to be behind the 8 ball if and when things do come up. I'll also add, it's not all boring regulatory, reading ordinances and showing up to City Hall. Meeting hosts is like one of the best things to do. You're going to accelerate your learning curve. You need a cleaner in a pinch. You got these contacts. It's fun. We're all in the industry because we like people and we like real estate and we like hosting. So the beauty of it is when hosts get together, it's just a good thing. Fun happens, but ultimately you're organized enough when the regulatory issues come out as well. I think to add one thing that is a common misperception is we do not need training to be an advocate. We do not need training to get involved with a regulatory discussion in your local jurisdiction. Why? Because we as hosts are already the experts in hosting. We're already the experts in our own life, in our own story, in our own economic impact. You know that. You have the numbers in front of you. You know you hired X number of contractors and you have maybe even full-time employees or whatever you have. That's the story, right? This is the fastest growing segment in travel and tourism. And cities don't really understand who we are, why we're doing what we're doing, and the benefits of short-term rental activity in their community. And again, we're good apples. We're following the rules. If you do all those things, you should be proud to stand up there or to invite your council member, whomever, to meet and discuss what the benefits of your activity are. So just getting back to the specific question, looking for your local community group, your alliance, if you have one. If you don't, consider getting a small group of people together for all the benefits thereof. And then lastly is understanding that you are the expert and you may be called upon to speak about what you've done and do as a short-term rental owner or host. And you can proactively do that by connecting with whomever represents you in your city or county. And that again is these are all beneficial things. Back to where I started the Dallas Short-Term Rental Alliance in 2020. There's been a long saga since then. But there was an instance in 2021 where all of the power grid in my state, in Texas, went down during a big freeze. And so we got all the short-term rental owners and operators because we were organized and started the emergency accommodations program. All of a sudden, the short-term rental community was one of the unsung or maybe even sung heroes, helping people who didn't have power find places with power. And the city got wind of that. They helped amplify that message. So kind of back to this, what can you do when you're organized? You can prevent a lot of misperceptions and bad narratives from getting spun out of control just by being organized. And it's frankly a beautiful thing. We've seen it happen city after city. If you're not involved yet, get involved now.
Awesome. Yeah, I guess that's the key message as well, right? So if you're not part of an alliance now, join one or create one, because you should be doing it sooner rather than later, not just waiting for something to go wrong and you needing the help of one. You can be having an impact now in the community and as part of the industry. The sooner you join, the better.
No training required.
Awesome. Love it. So another kind of, I guess, fuel for the fire for regulation at the moment is talk around affordable housing shortages. Some of that is believable potentially in some areas of the world, some of that maybe less so. How can short-term rental hosts coexist when that is kind of the narrative in the press and among governments? What can short-term rental hosts do to kind of maybe vouch for themselves and argue their point against that potentially? And I know this is a tough one.
Yeah, well, we like tough questions over here. Not afraid. It's a very complex issue. Housing affordability, workforce housing. These are all challenges of our time, especially post-pandemic. I don't have a perfect answer. Nobody does. What we do know is that there have been studies and they bear out that short-term rentals do have some impact, but it's oftentimes negligible or minimal or very localized in certain neighborhoods. So understanding that there is research to rely upon when this issue comes up. The VRMA, Vacation Rental Management Association, has done studies on this issue. So connecting and communicating with organizations like VRMA or Rent Responsibly to get resources, to get information if this issue does come up in your town is one kind of knee-jerk thing you should do. And that frankly applies to any issue that we're talking about here today. We'd love to help. That's what we're here for. So that being the case, I think understanding that without having our own voice in this conversation, and that's literally your voice. If you're listening to my voice, you're listening for a reason. Your voice matters where you live, just as my voice matters where I live, but my voice does not matter where you live. So understanding that as a local person, you have an opportunity to tell your story. And oftentimes those stories are affordable housing stories. Like, how do you afford to live in your house? Is some of your rental income going to pay for your living expenses? Would you be able to afford where you live or where your home is, if it's a second home or whatever, if you didn't have the opportunity to have that income from short-term renting? And again, personal story. My mom passed away and she left her house to our family. And so we're looking into making it a vacation rental right now because we can't afford to keep the house otherwise, and we want to. That's an affordable housing story. And so just understanding that it's a very nuanced discussion. This is not something you need to become the expert in. Just find the resources that are already out there if you need them, and understand that there's a story to tell from your side as well, and your story matters.
That makes sense. Yeah, your personal story, personal information has a lot of power, as you say, Dave. And again, if you're joining an alliance, you can give that voice a bit more amplification as well, right? And let it be heard by more people too. Switching gears again, I've got you all over the place, Dave. When we're thinking about kind of responsible hosting and having this positive image in the local community, it's not just the host at play to some degree; it's also the guests, right? If you've got guests that don't behave, that paints a bad image on you and the industry. How can hosts go about selecting the right guests for their property so they don't have any of those issues?
If I only had that solution in 2014 when somebody threw a big party at my rental, got me into a lot of hot water, which ultimately led to starting Noise Aware, my previous company, I would have a better answer. But I think I referenced the spidey sense earlier. If you don't inquire or ask any questions, or the simple, what are you coming to town for? Or, what do you want to do when you're here? Is there any way I can help you? That's the win-win. That's how you become a hospitable host, right? I know who I'm talking to here, Miles.
Yeah,
But
well done, well done,
the
love
way
it.
to be the way to be hospitable is to engage, and I think in that post booking, pre arrival window, you have an opportunity to fundamentally help your guests, start to earn that 5-star review, but also hear and learn what your guests are actually trying to do and achieve and see, and what kind of experience they have and want, have in mind. And I think that's really what we need to do best as an industry, is ask questions and respond accordingly, and make sure folks are aware of where the guardrails are. Um, if you have one neighbor who is particularly sensitive, and it's on this side of the house, or they have an understanding that quiet hours start at 9 p.m. If you're not telling your guests that, how else are they going to know? So I think that's one thing that's lost in overly automated systems, is the opportunity to flag things. And then there's a lot of tools out there, Superhog, AutoHost, and et cetera, that will help you with more of a deeper understanding of your guest, or background check type of guest risk mitigation tool. So look into that if you want to put a system in place or technology in place to help you out. Miles, I'll also say, Miles, have you stayed in a short-term rental before?
I have indeed, Dave. I have
You have,
indeed.
right? Like, so the deal. Like, most people have vacation brain. They're not reading everything. So
Yeah,
redundancy matters. Hitting people with a message a couple times and then having on-site signage goes a long, long way. And so I think, goes back to putting yourself in the guest shoes, and thinking like a guest, and preparing and preventing things ahead of time. That's your best medicine against the host nightmare or the host headache that you don't want.
100%. And I think there as well, as you say, there's a repetition of messages, and also making sure that you're scheduling messages at the right time, right? So when checkout is coming up, that's a great time to remind people about where the trash can is, and that they've got to make sure it's not overflowing onto the curb and that kind of thing, right? So that's important to think about it from a messaging perspective too.
Yeah, and you can have fun with it. I actually, there's a fun story of a host in Dallas that actually buried in their house rules a code word. And so they would playfully, when people were asking for the check-in instructions, they just say, "Hey, did you get a chance to see the house rules?" And they say, "Yeah, I did." It's like, "Oh, well, what was the code word?" We have a fun way to, have people ensure that they read the house rules, because we have sensitive neighbors, something like that. The code word was blue. And so if they just said, "Yeah, I saw it, code word blue," it's like, great. And those guests never had an issue. The ones who had to go back and read the rules, now you actually know that they read the rules. It's kind of a fun, interactive way. I don't recommend everybody do that. You don't have to be boring. You don't have to be, like the substitute teacher who's just, bashing people over the head with rules or whatever. Make it on brand, make it fun, and ensure your guests stay out of hot water as well. I mean, that's the worst case scenario, right? When people don't know the rules and they're like, you never told me. So it's really about communication.
Awesome. And then just to wrap it off, Dave, I didn't give you any forewarning of this, but I'd love to know, if you were going into the short-term rental industry today, brand new, what would you love to have been told, 10, 15 years ago when you kind of first got into it?
I would have loved to have been told that we as an industry are actually more like the automobile industry in the 1920s than the automobile industry we know today. And I think you've heard me wax a little bit poetic on this before, Miles. So if you haven't heard my spiel about the Ford Model T, here it comes. So in 1908, the Ford Model T, if you're watching, you just saw my little Model T model that keep on hand.
Lovely.
The Ford Model T rolls off the assembly lines onto roads that are occupied by horses and buggies, but don't have rules of the road for automobiles. And so noise, trash, and parking are actually the top three complaints about the automobile, very much like we are experiencing here in the land of short-term rentals today. But the only way that the automobile industry created rules of the road and ultimately got integrated into society and then ultimately celebrated as one of the greatest industries to come out of the 20th century was by engagement by what they called gearheads or the auto enthusiasts. Our version of the super hosts or the hosts out there, or the hospitable hosts that end up showing up, having conversations, knowing they're the expert, right? Gearheads and auto fanatics were the ones who knew the right speed limit because they knew that the automobiles stalled out at too slow of a speed, right? The original speed limits were 5 miles an hour, but cars stall out at 5 miles an hour back then. Those are the types of mistakes that the regulatory environment can make if we don't get engaged. So I think just understanding that we're like in the 1920s automobile, and there is so much road ahead of us to develop and design and build the industry that we want to be a part of. But it only happens through engagement, and it only happens through owning the fact that we are the experts and we can build the industry that is very sustainable in all ways, that communities celebrate, that is very welcoming to all. I think a lot of those pieces are there. They're just not all put together yet. So just understanding we're in a young, vibrant, dynamic, evolving industry, and you have a role to play. I wandered into this industry thinking like, oh, somebody had to have figured this out. Like this, if I have that problem, somebody else probably did before me. Oh no, my friend, there are plenty of things that we have yet to solve. And we can do it, and I hope Rent Responsibly is one of those galvanizing and organizing functions. If you haven't signed up for our newsletters and our content, we're constantly talking about the future of this space and how you can get involved and how you can learn and how you can make more money the right way.
Cool. Dave, thank you very much. Maybe you could just remind us of the website again for anyone that wants to go and check out some more or check out the directory.
Sure. Yeah. rentresponsibly.org. And we just launched our Rent Responsibly Network, which is a platform for hosts that houses a lot of our educational content. It's free to join. That's network.rentresponsibly.org. You are very welcome to join there. I'm sure you'll meet some people in your neck of the woods. Again, trying to make it easier to build the industry that we want to see.
Cool. Thank you very much, Dave. Thank you everyone for listening as well. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode.